YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for April 16th to 22nd. This week I intentionally read 2 books, I listened to 2 podcasts, and I finished listening to 1 book. However, I was sharing a house with 10 other people, 3 of whom are under the age of 5, so I have experienced bits and pieces of the following TV shows, movies, and books. First this week I finished The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu by Joshua Hammer. This book had me hooked at the concept of badass librarians, but suffered from a case of not being what I expected. It felt like it was about 25% badass librarians who kept manuscripts hidden, and 75% history of the Middle East and the rise of Islamic extremists. This reminds me of a time that a friend of mine ate a bit of candy and went, "This is terrible fudge." I looked over him and said, that's toffee. He said, "Oh, well, in that case, it's pretty good toffee." That's how I feel about this book. If I'd known at the beginning that the ratio was heavily weighted towards Islamic history, I would have been pumped about it. But I spent most of the time wondering where the story of the manuscripts went. I was enthralled by that information. This book was thoroughly researched, and I appreciate that, but I would have liked it better if I knew what I was getting myself into. Since I didn't, it was a struggle bus situation, to borrow a phrase from Kirsty. Second this week, I finished Orcs and Crake by Margaret Atwood. I'm reading this for my local book club, and originally I thought I'd read some of it in middle school, but it didn't come out till I was in high school, so I have no idea what book I'm thinking about. It had a similar opening. If anyone can think of a book that's probably inappropriate for a 12-year-old, and it starts with the protagonist living in a tree, let me know down in the comments below. For those that don't know, this is a post-apocalyptic novel that takes place in the near future and how society got to that point. Our protagonist is trying to keep new humans alive and scavenge for goods, and keeps flashing back to the way the world had been. I really enjoyed how unflinching this book was and how it poked fun at things that were appropriate to society at the time as well as today. Although the protagonist is really unsympathetic at times, you can't help but feel for him when he is vulnerable when you get to learn his backstory. It's also really telling that the book's title features the names of people he loved instead of his own name, which he gradually loses through the process of the book. I found out while I was reading this that this is the first of a trilogy, so I guess I have 2 more books to add to my ever-expanding TBR. This week I listened to Criminal, which is a true crime podcast that I mentioned last week. I also managed to get my mom into Serial, specifically the first season. We got through about half of the first season while winding our way through the mountains to get here. This is a re-listen for me because I devoured this podcast when I first found it, and I expect we'll be listening to the rest on the way home. I've been meaning to catch up on what's happened since the season came out in terms of Adnan Syed's case. Serial is a story told week by week, and in the case of the first season, it's about a murder that happened in 1999 and a defendant who protests his innocence. The host, Sarah Koenig, goes through the evidence bit by bit to see if what he claims is plausible. If you're into true crime and somehow missed this podcast, go download and listen to it immediately. This week I listened to Fatal Flame by Lindsay Faye. This is the 3rd and final installment of the Timothy Wilde series. First I have to talk about something that was slightly devastating to me, which was that they changed voice actors for the last book, which is like, what? No, why? Why are you doing this to me? The new actor isn't bad, but it felt wrong after listening to the same actor to do the first 2 books, especially since I've listened to them this year. This series takes place in 1840s New York, and without spoiling anything, especially because it is the 3rd in a series, here are some thoughts on this finale. I loved all of the relationships that were introduced in the first book and expanded throughout the series. This book was a little longer than the previous 2, so everything could be wrapped up nicely, and I appreciated that. I especially love the complicated relationship between Timothy and his brother Valentine, and how after so many years they are still learning things about each other. This is a great series to pick up if you like mystery and murder. That's it for this week. I want to know what types of shows and movies have been played around you recently that you might not have watched otherwise. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you next Monday. Bye!